J.D. Vance says not only do conservatives need to, in his words, wake up, but what they need to wake up to is the fact that most of American life and culture should be, in his words, ripped out like a tumor. Those are, again, his words, not mine. Watch.
Our leaders right now are so corrupt and so vile that if you assimilate into their culture, you're assimilating into like garbage liberal elite culture. You're not assimilating into traditional American culture. And so this is a tough pickle for me. I don't even know what the right answer is here, because you can't just teach these things. You can't teach that we live in a great country if the leaders are actively aligned against it. So almost the thing that you need to do, step one in the process, is to totally replace, like rip out like a tumor, the current American leadership class, and then reinstall some sense of American, political religion.
We need to rip it out like a tumor and then install political religion. The man who is interviewing J.D. Vance here gets very excited about this idea, and it leads, this is important here, it leads J.D. Vance to explain sort of influences on his thought, where he gets his ideas on subjects like this.
You said something that I would like to zero down on. How do we effectively, quote, rip out the disgusting leadership class?
Oh, man. I mean,
because let me expand on that just a second, because and I'm going to give you a little cover here, because it's not just, obviously elections, that's one thing. Okay. But unfortunately, this evil leadership class has already taken over all of our institutions. Current pipeline is to turn them into those people that we just called evil and disgusting. How do we, aside from elections, how do we rip out this leadership class? So these institutions are corrupted and rotted to the core. This elite ideology is everywhere and in all the things. What other options do we have besides voting them out, which we're seeing is ineffectual?
Yeah. So again, this is like a tough question, but this is maybe the question that confronts us right now. There's this guy, Curtis Yarvin, who's written about some of these things.
Knowing chuckle there. There's this guy, Curtis Yarvin, who's written about some of these things. This is Curtis Yarvin, who J.D. Vance is citing here as he is talking about the need to, seize the universities, use the government to destroy businesses who aren't right wing, talking about needing to rip out the American system like a tumor. Here's the guy he is citing as his sort of the source of his thinking on these matters.
So I've reduced this very complicated problem to a simple four-letter acronym, which is RAGE. And RAGE stands for Retire All Government Employees. Very, very simple. Now, the problem with this is, why have you never heard this before? Why has no one ever suggested, let's just get rid of this thing? You have a government in Washington. You're either for it or against it. What is a government? A government is just a corporation which owns the country. Nothing more, nothing less. It so happens that our sovereign corporation is very poorly managed. And there's a very simple way to replace that, which is what we do to all corporations that have failed. We simply delete them. We haven't been able to do that with our government for 200 years. So it's gotten a little bit stale.
We should delete the U.S. government because it's stale. It has been around for too long. We haven't been able to do that, meaning delete our government for 200 years, so it's gotten a bit stale. It's been around too long. So what would that entail, deleting the U.S. government?
The other thing about getting rid of your government is you can't just say, well, the limits of the government are the limits of the formal government. You have to say, well, what is the system actually? And it includes a lot of things that are called NGOs, things that are called universities, things that are funded by the state. It's a very, very large system, and it all needs to be destroyed. Fortunately, there's a lot of talented Americans who actually know how to run things and make things work and are generalists. And you can just get these people, put them in a position of responsibility, and have them do their thing. And finally, you need a CEO, and a national CEO is what's called a dictator. It's the same thing. There's no difference between a CEO and a dictator. If Americans want to change their government, they're going to have to get over their dictator phobia.
If Americans want to change their government, they're going to have to get over their dictator phobia. So the vice presidential candidates debate is tomorrow. Tim Walz, the Democratic candidate, has been a governor, is currently the governor of Minnesota. He's been a long-term congressman, high school teacher, football coach, a soldier for decades. J.D. Vance, the Republican candidate, is a different kind of cat, forgive me. Aside from a brief stint in the Marine Corps, where he served with a public affairs unit, he has spent his entire adult life working for or being financially supported by eccentric right-wing tech billionaires, specifically ones who have devoted themselves to the political teachings of this guy.
Finally, you need a CEO, and a national CEO is what's called a dictator. It's the same thing.
I have debated whether or not to talk about this on the show because I feel like it gives me the oogs. But I also feel like this is an important thing to know about the Republicans' vice presidential nominee and what he has to offer and why he was brought onto the ticket despite his palpable lack of political skill or likability, his lack of any track record in politics whatsoever. And after he spent less than 2 years in the only public office he's ever held, which is a Senate seat that he only barely won thanks to one of those eccentric tech billionaires giving him the single largest Senate campaign donation in the history of this country. I mean, he comes wholly from this very, very obscure, eccentric, right-wing subculture of tech billionaires. And his relationship with this eccentric Silicon Valley pro-dictatorship philosophy has been pretty widely discussed in print. These are a whole bunch of articles that have discussed this at one level or another. It's been discussed in print, but I don't feel like it's widely understood by the country who is paying attention to this guy as a candidate. But this is where J.D. Vance's big ideas come from about where the country is heading for. Quote, Vance is friends with Curtis Yarvin, whom he openly cites as a political influence. Yarvin, the main political influence on all of the people who have supported J.D. Vance throughout his career, including paying to install him in the U.S. Senate. When J.D. Vance says stuff like we're in a late Republican period, which is something he says all the time, he doesn't mean anything about the Republican Party. He means we're at the time right before the Roman Republic collapsed. And what happened after the Roman Republic collapsed? Well, a dictator, Caesar, came in, and wasn't that better? He talks about being in a late Republican period all the time. That's him channeling this guy, Yarvin. When Vance says universities are the enemy and they should be seized, he's not only channeling Elizabeth Dilling and Alan Zoll and all the weird far-right crusaders against the universities from the 30s and 40s. That would be troubling enough. He's also channeling this guy, Yarvin, who says that while we are firing all the government employees, we should do the same to the universities because they're all part of the bigger system that all needs to be destroyed. He says, quote, retire their employees and liquidate their assets. Universities in particular have lovely campuses, many of which are centrally located and should be quite attractive to developers. Meaning, let's put somebody in to be a, what does he call it? CEO, a national CEO, which he says is indistinguishable from a dictator. And then the dictator should take over all the universities and sell them off to developers. This is literally a pro-dictatorship, pro-monarchy philosophy that is not just about ending the U.S. system of government, deleting the U.S. government, but then using the power of a dictator to dismantle universities, dismantle businesses, to dismantle all of civil society, to instead install a whole new system controlled by the state that serves just the desires of the dear leader. Tomorrow at the debate, it is going to come up that J.D. Vance wants a national abortion ban. It's going to come up that he has told and continues to tell horrible lies about immigrants. It is going to come up that he has said his running mate was America's Hitler, his phrase, and cultural heroin, and that Trump's presidency was a failure. It's going to come up. His involvement in Project 2025 is going to come up. His proposal that people without children should be taxed more and should have their votes count less. It will all come up at tomorrow's debate. But what do you do with this stuff?
The thing that you need to do, step one in the process, is to totally replace, like rip out like a tumor, the current American leadership class.
Republicans, conservatives, we're still terrified of wielding power, of actually doing the job that the people sent us here to do.
Finally, you need a CEO, and a national CEO is what's called a dictator. It's the same thing.
But we've got to get comfortable with wielding power.
There's no difference between a CEO and a dictator. If Americans want to change their government, they're going to have to get over their dictator phobia.
Going to have to get over their dictator phobia. What do you do with this level of radicalism? Trying to take over in Washington right now and trying to convince the far right that they've got to stop being afraid of wielding this kind of power this way. What do you do with this? At the debate tomorrow, in the campaign in general? I don't know, but we got to do something with it. Watch this space.